What if the only companion you had in your final years was a dog no one else wanted? An old woman, a stray German shepherd, both forgotten, both quietly fading away, until one winter morning, they found each other, and everything changed. Like this video, if you believe love has no age limit, share it with someone who knows the quiet power of companionship. Comment if a dog has ever rescued your heart. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories where loyalty finds us when we need it most. The woman who no one remembered, and the dog who never forgot. The snow had started falling before dawn. Outside, the world was quiet, soft, white, still. Inside a small, forgotten house on the edge of town, 83-year-old Mrs. Margaret Lane sat wrapped in a patchwork quilt, staring out the frosted window. No visitors, no family, just the ticking of a clock and the hum of a radiator. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days, maybe weeks, and the silence was beginning to feel permanent. But that morning, a shadow appeared in her backyard. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't a delivery man. It was a German shepherd, ragged, shivering, eyes searching. And without knowing why, Margaret opened the door. Not just to the dog, but to the story that would make her unforgettable. Before the silence, there was always someone watching over her. Long before the gray hair and quiet days, Margaret Lane had been a name people knew. She was a teacher at the local elementary school, a woman with kind eyes, ink-stained fingers, and a voice that could calm the wildest of children. For over 4 decades, she taught generations of kids how to read, how to dream, and how to believe in themselves. She never married, never had children of her own, but her heart was never empty. Her students were her family, her classroom, her world. And in the last few years of her career, something unexpected filled the parts of her life she didn't even know were lonely. A police canine unit had visited the school during a community safety day. Among the officers stood a handler named Jake and his young German shepherd trainee, Valor. Margaret had seen hundreds of dogs in her life, but something about Valor's alert posture and soulful amber eyes stopped her mid-sentence. He wasn't just smart, he was present, connected, as if he understood everything without words. After the demonstration, Jake let Valor meet the children, but it was Margaret he kept returning to. Sitting beside her desk, head resting gently against her knee, he stayed long after the students had gone. Over the next months, Jake and Valor made regular visits. What started as safety talks turned into quiet conversations, shared lunches, and growing friendship. And then, one day, after Jake was injured during a night operation and placed on extended leave, Margaret offered to help care for Valor while he healed. She didn't expect to bond with the dog the way she did, but Valor had a gift. He sensed things others couldn't: sadness, pain, loneliness, and he didn't leave people behind. When Jake eventually returned to duty, he made the toughest call of his life. He asked if Margaret would be willing to keep Valor permanently. "Where he's happiest," he said. Margaret cried. Valor wagged his tail. And for a time, everything felt whole. Until the diagnosis, the hospital stays, the memory that began to fade. One morning, Margaret woke up and Valor was gone. She couldn't remember when or how, only that the silence that remained felt wrong. She didn't know Valor had never stopped watching over her, and that one day he'd come back. The day the alarm wasn't the only thing that went off. It was a Thursday morning when the neighborhood was shaken by the shrill wail of fire truck sirens. The quiet cul-de-sac where Margaret lived hadn't seen this much noise in years. Neighbors spilled out in robes and slippers, watching as the bright red engines roared down the street and screeched to a halt. just 2 houses away from Margaret's pale blue bungalow. Inside, Margaret sat frozen in her kitchen chair, a kettle still whistling on the stove behind her. She didn't smell the smoke. She didn't see the flicker of orange creeping along the baseboards. Her world had shrunk to soft humming in her ears and a name on her lips. Valor. And then, a crash. The back door flew open. Heavy paws pounded across the hardwood. A black and gray blur rushed into the room, knocking over a chair. Amber eyes locked on hers. It was him. Valor. She blinked once, twice, unsure if this was a memory or a miracle. But the heat crawling up the walls was real. The smoke was thickening. And the dog? He was not waiting. With a low growl of determination, Valor circled behind her, nudging her arm with his snout. She didn't move. Not at first. Her body was stiff, her thoughts trapped in a maze of confusion. Then he barked, sharp, loud, protective. Something clicked. She rose slowly, legs trembling, and Valor pressed close, guiding her to the door like a guardian angel with 4 legs. They reached the threshold just as a small explosion from the kitchen sent shards of glass flying across the room. But the door was open. The sky was clear. And Valor never let go of her side. The firefighters saw her just in time, wrapped her in a blanket, checked her pulse, asked how she'd gotten out. She pointed at the dog beside her, soot-covered, panting, eyes locked on her face like he hadn't blinked in years. That's my boy," she whispered. Nobody knew how he'd found her. Nobody knew how he got in. But Margaret did. He had never really left. The dog, everyone thought, was gone. Later that day, after the fire was contained and the neighbors had gone back to their homes, the firefighters lingered, mostly around the dog. Where did he come from? I thought her old dog died years ago. Looks like a German shepherd, real trained too. Margaret, now wrapped in a second blanket, sat quietly on the tailgate of the fire chief's truck. Valor sat at her feet, like a statue of loyalty, smoke-stained fur, tail still, eyes always watching. When the fire captain approached her gently and asked who the dog belonged to, Margaret looked down at him and said, "He's mine." Or, "He was. His name is Valor. He disappeared 3 winters ago." Gasps, murmurs, disbelief. She continued, voice fragile but firm. "I opened the gate by mistake. He ran out. We searched for weeks, months. Posters, calls, prayers." Her voice cracked. "But he never came home." One of the younger firefighters crouched down and slowly extended a hand. Valor sniffed it, gave a small tail wag, then turned back to Margaret, ever focused, ever guarding. That night, news spread. A local reporter picked up the story. "Missing dog returns after 3 years. Saves elderly woman from house fire." The comments online exploded. Dogs never forget. This made me cry. That's not a pet. That's an angel. Margaret sat on her porch the next morning, house partially charred, heart completely full, and Valor sat beside her like he had never left. And in a way he hadn't. He had just been waiting. What was lost was never really gone. Over the next few days, Valor's presence drew more than just local attention. News vans parked across the street. Neighbors brought treats. Children waved from the sidewalk. But Valor didn't care for any of it. He stayed close to Margaret, his eyes following her every move, his ears alert to every creak of the porch. It was like time had collapsed, like the 3 missing years never happened. But Margaret knew better. She noticed the scar along his left leg, the way he favored his right paw, the bits of wire embedded near his collar line, as if he'd once been tangled or trapped. She also noticed how he flinched when the tea kettle whistled, how he didn't sleep deeply, always waking at the slightest sound. He had stories, but he couldn't tell them. So Margaret did what she could. She opened the old photo album, the one with his puppy pictures, his training days, their mountain hikes. She showed him page by page and whispered, "Remember this? You were always brave." And Valor rested his head on her knee. It was quiet and heavy and real, because in that moment she understood. He didn't just come back to save her from the fire. He came back to finish what he started, to protect the woman who had once protected him, to remind her that even after all that time, after all that pain, he was still hers, and she was still his. Fire doesn't always leave ashes. Sometimes it leaves questions. That night, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, the knock came. Firm, repeated, too confident to be a neighbor. Margaret opened the door slowly. 2 men in pressed suits stood on her porch. One wore a badge clipped to his belt. The other carried a tablet. "Mrs. Whitaker?" She nodded. "We're with the State K-9 Recovery Unit. We're here about the dog." Valor stepped between them before they even finished their sentence. No growl, just presence. Solid, watchful. The men exchanged glances. "Ma'am, the dog you have is government property. He went missing 3 years ago during an active case. We're investigating possible misconduct." Margaret's heart thudded. Misconduct? "He was declared dead," she whispered. The agent didn't blink. "There are questions about that." They explained that Valor's last handler, Detective Miles Harlan, had vanished the same night Valor did. Evidence suggested a setup: drugs, trafficking, betrayal from within the force. Some believed the dog had been taken out to silence a witness. Others believed he ran. Margaret's voice shook. "He's not evidence. He's a soul." The agent looked down at Valor. "That may be, ma'am, but if he remembers anything, we need to know." Valor stood silent, head high, chest out, scarred but unflinching. They gave her until morning. If she didn't surrender him, they'd come back with a court order, and just like that. Margaret knew the fire wasn't over. It had only just begun. One last run. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, stroking Valor's grizzled fur, his big head resting on her lap. The scar along his ribs seemed to pulse in the lamplight, as if it too remembered the flames, the betrayal, the pain. "They'll take you," she whispered. "Not for justice, for control." Valor lifted his head, eyes locking with hers. He understood. And in that look, Margaret made a decision. At dawn, while fog still wrapped the town like a secret, she packed a small bag and opened the back door. "Let's go," she said softly. They didn't run. They walked, quiet, steady, determined, like they had every right to vanish into the woods. Halfway through the trail, they heard it. A drone, low, circular, closing in. Valor growled low in his chest. Margaret's old bones ached, but she kept moving. That's when they heard the shout. "Mrs. Whitaker, stop!" 3 agents burst through the trees, but Valor didn't flinch. He turned, stepped in front of her, and did what he'd once been trained to do: protect the innocent. And for the first time in 3 years, he barked. Not just any bark. A command. A memory. And that's when something extraordinary happened. The agent who had barked the order to stop dropped his weapon, eyes wide. "Valor?" It was Detective Harlan, alive, broken. But there. He stepped forward, hands trembling. "They told me you were dead." Valor barked again, took 3 steps forward, then stopped and looked back, urging Margaret to trust. She did. Together, they walked into the clearing, toward truth, toward closure, toward the fire that had started it all, a home no one expected. The investigation reopened. With Harlan's testimony and Margaret's journal, the truth about the warehouse fire finally surfaced. Valor had never failed his training. He had been framed by someone who wanted him silenced, someone who feared what he might uncover. The media storm was relentless. A wrongly disgraced canine officer, an elderly woman who refused to abandon the only soul who never left her side. But through it all, Margaret and Valor stayed together. The town that once whispered behind curtains now knocked on her door with pies, flowers, and apologies. And Harlan? He visited every Sunday, often bringing his daughter, who had once been terrified of dogs. Now she rode on Valor's back like a knight, giggling as the old dog trotted gently around Margaret's backyard. Valor was officially reinstated, not to the force, but to the heart of the community. The mayor presented him with a medal and a plaque, but Margaret tucked both away in a drawer. "The only reward he wants," she said with a smile, "is his spot on the porch and half a grilled cheese." As spring returned and the lilacs bloomed once more, Margaret would often be found in her rocking chair, Valor beside her, both of them watching the world move on. They didn't need adventure anymore. They had peace. They had each other. And that was enough. Where loyalty rests. The camera slowly pulls back. A quiet afternoon sun glows over the porch. Margaret, wrapped in a soft cardigan, hums an old tune as she knits. Beside her, Valor lies stretched out, his graying fur rising and falling with every slow, peaceful breath. Wind rustles the lilac bushes, carrying the faint scent of spring. A small child's laughter echoes in the background, Harlan's daughter chasing butterflies nearby. Valor lifts his head, ears twitching. He watches her, tail thumping once against the wood. Then, satisfied, he rests his head on Margaret's slippered feet. The screen fades to black with a soft piano melody. And then, in simple white text, "Not all heroes wear badges forever. Some just stay."